Good morning. So in today's lesson, our topic is equivalent fractions and decimals. Lesson 9.3. We are on page 367 of the fourth grade textbook. And so let's look at the unlock the problem. Daniel spent a day hiking through a wildlife preserve. During the first hour of the hike, he drank 6/10 of water. How many hundredths of a liter did he drink? So we need to know 6/10 of a liter of water and how many hundredths. So we want to find an equivalent hundredths to 6/10. Underline what you need to find. I need to find how many hundredths of water of a liter did he drink, and how can you represent hundredths? So we know from yesterday that we can represent hundredths as a fraction or as a decimal. Well, one way we can write 6/10 as an equivalent fraction with the denominator of 100. So first, let's show 6/10. So 1, 2, 3, 4. We would shade 6/10, and then 100 is just 10 times more, right? So 10 times 10 is 100. 6 times 10 would be 60. Remember, there's 10 in each column of the 100 grid. So we would shade in 60 squares. Okay. So we're multiplying by a factor of 10 to find the equivalent fraction, and that would be 60/100ths. We already know how to do this. We've done that in previous lessons. Okay, so that's nothing new. Another way, we could write 6/10 as a decimal. Now, we know that 6/10 is 0.6, but 0.6 is the same as saying 0.60. So 0 ones, 6/10, and there are no hundredths, right? When we say 60 hundredths, it's not like we're saying 61 hundredths. So there, 0 is in the hundredths place. So Daniel drank 60 hundredths, or as a decimal, 60 hundredths liter of water. Why is 6/10 equivalent to 60 hundredths? Because there are 10 hundredths in 1/10. So there are 60 hundredths in 6/10. If we had 10 over 100, we could simplify that to 1/10. 60 hundredths, we could also simplify to 6/10. Jasmine collected 30 hundredths liter of water in a jar during a rainstorm. How many tenths of a liter did she collect? And so we're introduced to a new term here, equivalent decimals. Are decimals that name the same amount. You can write 30 hundredths as a decimal that names tenths. So write 30 hundredths as an equivalent decimal and show 30 hundredths in the place value chart. So if we're writing 30 hundredths, that's what we will write. Well, there are no hundredths, This because it's 30. It's not like, again, saying 31 hundredths. So 0 is in the hundredths place. So 30 hundredths is equivalent to 3 tenths. So we can write 30 hundredths as 0.3. We could also write 30 hundredths as a fraction with a denominator of 10. So how would we do that? So 30 hundredths is 30 hundredths. I'm sorry, we don't need the over 100 because it's already written right there. So 30 hundredths. 30 hundredths written as a fraction is 30 over 100. So now step 2, write 30 hundredths as an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 10. So we're going to start at 30 hundredths, and we're going to divide by the same factor. So what are we doing here? We're actually simplifying, right? We're finding the greatest common factor. Well, what do we have to divide 100 by to get a denominator of 10? Well, if 10 times 10 is 100, 100 divided by 10 is 100. So we're going to divide the numerator also by 10. So 30 divided by 10 is 3. So she collected 3 tenths, or as a decimal, 0.3, read as 3 tenths. Number 1, write 4 tenths as hundredths. Okay, so 4 tenths times what would give me hundredths? Well, we said there are 10 times 10 would give us 100. 10 times 4 would give us 40. So as a fraction, 4 tenths is the same as 40 hundredths. What would that be as a decimal? Well, 4 tenths is the same as 40 hundredths. 369, number 2. 7 tenths, write the number as hundredths in fraction form and decimal form as hundredths. So 7 tenths times what equals hundredths? 10 again. So 7 times 10, 70 hundredths is equal to 7 tenths, and 70 hundredths can be written as 0.70. Five tenths. Okay, this is 5 tenths. So as a fraction, we'd say 5 tenths. Or we can change this to its decimal form, equivalent decimal, which would be 50 hundredths. So 5 tenths times 10 over 10 gives us 50 hundredths. So 50 hundredths, 0.50. Number 3, 3 tenths. We would write that as 0.3 as a decimal. We would multiply the denominator by 10 to get hundredths, and 3 times 10 is 30. So 3 tenths as a decimal is equivalent to 0.30 as a decimal. Write the number as tenths in fraction form and decimal form. All right, so this is 40 hundredths, and we know that equivalent value is 4 tenths. So this as a fraction would be 40 over 100, and this as a fraction would be 4 tenths. So 4 tenths, 0.4. 80 hundredths as a decimal is 0.80. 80 hundredths is the same as 8 tenths. Because remember, we're dividing numerator and denominator by 10 to get tenths. And as a decimal, 8 tenths is written 0.8. So the fraction form of would be 8 tenths and 8 tenths as a decimal. 21 hundredths, not 21 100. 20 hundredths is the same as 2 tenths. Okay, so 20 hundredths divided by 10, again, will give us 2 hundredths. All right, so 20 hundredths as a decimal is 0.20, and read as 20 hundredths, which is equivalent to 0.2 or 2 tenths. Okay, number 8. Write the numbers hundredths in fraction form and decimal form. All right, so 8 tenths is written as 0.8 as a decimal. It's equivalent to 0.80, and we read this as 80 hundredths. Two tenths. We write that as 0.2 as a decimal. It is equal to 20 hundredths, and so it would be 20 over 100 as a fraction. 0.1 as a fraction, that's 1/10. 0.1 is equivalent to 10 hundredths. All right, number 11 through 13, write the number as tenths in fraction form and decimal form. All right, so 60 hundredths is the same as 6 tenths. If we divide 60 hundredths by 10, we would get 6 tenths. Okay, so 6 tenths we know is the same as 60 hundredths. We write 6 tenths as 0.6. 60 hundredths we write as 0.60. So 60 hundredths as tenths would be 6 over 10, and the decimal would be 0.6. 90 hundredths. Again, if we divide by 10, we would get 9 tenths. Okay, so 9 tenths is written as 0.9. 70 hundredths is equivalent to 7 tenths. As a fraction, 70 hundredths is the same as 7 tenths. Write the number as an equivalent mixed number with hundredths. So 1 and 4 tenths. As a decimal, that would be 1.4. So what would be an equivalent fraction to 4 tenths? What would be 40 hundredths? 10 times 4 is 40. 10 times 10 is 100. So how would we write 1 and 40 hundredths? 1.40. So 1 and 40 hundredths 1.40. 3 and 5/10. Well, we would write that as 3.5 in hundredths. I would multiply the 10 of 5/10 by 10 to get 100. And 5 times 5, 5 times 10 is 50. So 3 and 50 hundredths. How would you write that as a decimal? 3.50. Number 16. 2 and 9/10. As a decimal, it would be 2.9. We know that as hundredths, it would be 2 and 90 hundredths. All we're doing is multiplying by 10. 9 times 10 is 90. 10 times 10 is 100. So how do we write 2 and 90 hundredths as a decimal? 2.90. All right, page 370. Carter says 8 hundredths is equivalent to 8/10. Describe and correct Carter's error. So 0.08 equals 8 hundredths. 8/10 is not equivalent to 8 hundredths. Okay, so 8 hundredths equals 0.08 is 8 hundredths. 8/10 does not equal 8 100ths. It is equivalent to 80 100ths. And so 80 100ths is not equal to 8 hundredths. 18. For numbers 18a through 18e, choose true or false. 6/10 is equal to 6 hundredths. 6/10 to 6 hundredths. Well, to turn 6/10 into hundredths, I'd multiply by 10. 10 times 6 is 60. So 60 hundredths is not the same, so false. 3/10 is equivalent to 30 hundredths. If I multiply 3/10 by 10 over 10, I get 30 100ths. So that's true. 40 hundredths is equivalent to 4/10. Well, what's 4 times 10? 4 times 10 is 40. 10 times 10 is 100, so that's also true. 40 hundredths does not equal 4 hundredths. 5/10 is equal to 50 hundredths. Yes. 5 times 10 over 10 is 50 hundredths, so that's true. All right. How many lakes and rivers does your state have? The U.S. Geological Survey defines inland water as water that is surrounded by land. The Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and the Great Lakes are not considered inland water. Just over 2/100 of the entire United States is inland water. Write 2/100 as a decimal. So 2/100 as a decimal is 0.02. If I put 2 right after decimal point, remember that would be 20/100. So 2/100, we have to have a 0 in front of the 2. Can you write 2/100 as tenths? Can we write 2/100 as tenths? Well, is 10 a factor of 2? No. So I could divide the 100 by 10 to get to tenths, but no, we can't do that. How many hundredths do we need to make a tenth? 10 to make a tenth. So 200, 0.02 is 2/100. And if I need at least 10/100 to make 1/10, then how can I write 2/100 as tenths? I can't. All right, 21. About 17/100 of the area of Rhode Island is inland water. Write 17/100 as a fraction. And we write it just like you say it. 17/100. Louisiana's lakes and rivers cover about 1/10 of the state. Write 1/10 as hundredths in word, fraction form, and decimal form. All right, so 1/10 as hundredths. So 1/10 times 10 over 10 would give me 10/100. So in word form, it would be 10/100. Fraction form, 10 over 100. As decimal form, 0.10. So that's it for lesson 9.3. Our next lesson will be relating fractions, decimals, and money. So until our lesson on 9.4, may the numbers always be in your favor.